Hello grade 9s, I've been making these video lessons for the other grades. I haven't forgotten about you, so here is your video. I really hope that you are well, keeping fit and safe. This video is just going to focus on ending off last term's work. Our focus was on World War II Nazi Germany, and we still had to look at the end of World War II. We did cover ghettos, concentration camps, as well as death camps. So I just want to go back to ghettos. Remember, before Jews were put in concentration camps and death camps thereafter, they were first placed in ghettos. The most prominent ghetto was known as the Warsaw Ghetto. What happened was the Germans took over the capital city of Warsaw. They then fenced off this capital city, forced all the Jews to move into Warsaw. This then became known as the Warsaw Ghetto. Then remember, I told you ghettos were all supposed to be liquidated, then Jews would be taken to concentration camps. There was about 65,000 Jews who were still in this ghetto when the Germans decided that they would like to liquidate the ghetto and exterminate the Jews. In response, the Jews decided to have an uprising. So, in 1942, the Germans rounded up thousands of people in the Warsaw Ghetto, and their intention was to send them to an extermination camp. While this was happening, in 1963, the Jews decided to have an uprising since they had nothing to lose. So they decided to attack the Germans when they wanted to liquidate the ghetto. They fired shots at the Germans. The Germans were very surprised by this attack, so they were forced to leave the ghetto. However, they came back the next day with ammunition, more soldiers, as well as bombs, and they squashed the ghetto uprising, and in doing so, they also killed Jews in this area. Just so that you're aware, conditions in the ghettos were very dire. There was lack of sanitation, there was lack of water would freeze in the winter times, Jews were very crowded, broken sewage systems, they didn't have enough food, and lastly, many of them died from disease. There were some organizations and people who were brave enough to go against the Nazis. In particular, we're going to look at the White Rose movement. This movement was started by Sophie and Hans Scholl. Sophie and Hans Scholl were both students at the University of Munich. They decided one day to take a bag of leaflets to the university and distribute them all over the university. Students then would pick up these leaflets on their way to their class. These leaflets contained information of protest action against Germans and ideas of how to help Jewish people. Unfortunately, while they were distributing these leaflets, the janitor at the University of Munich caught them. They were jailed, sentenced, and executed. Another example of a resistance movement was run by a church minister, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Basically, the Catholic Church had pledged their allegiance to Hitler. Hitler said if they do not interfere with his policies and promote his policies, that he will allow the Catholic Church to continue running. Therefore, the Catholic Church was run by a German known as Ludwig Müller. He became known as the Reichstag minister, and he promoted Hitler's ideologies. However, Dietrich Bonhoeffer started his own confessing church, whereby he went against Nazi policies and against what Hitler believed. He rather looked at the idea of Catholicism and promoted these ideals. In doing so, he also was imprisoned and executed for his beliefs. So grade 9s, we have looked at the outbreak of World War II and certain events that have happened. I would like to now just briefly cover the ending of World War II. As I told you, please, there was the Allied powers versus the Axis powers. The Allied powers were Britain, France, Italy, and Western Europe. The Axis powers were Germany, Japan, Russia, and Eastern Europe. Please do not forget, however, that Russia changed sides. They moved to the Allied powers. Remember, Germany broke the non-aggressive pact in which they invaded Russia. So Russia then joined the Allied powers. So closer to the end of the war, 1933 to 35, USA started to see that Germany was about to win the war. So they decided to finally get involved. By 1945, Britain, USA, as well as Russia had started to win the war. Russia had taken over most of the Eastern Bloc, and Britain and USA had taken over most parts of Germany. Hitler soon realized that he was losing the war, and him and his lover Eva Braun shot themselves in a bunker. The war then ended with the victory of the Allied powers and the loss of the Axis powers. Due to the Axis powers losing, Germany was forced to liberate her concentration camps. When the Allied powers moved into Germany, they were shocked at the amount of concentration camps, as they were not aware of how vast it was. So in 1945, most of the concentration camps were liberated and the Jews were set free. I bet grade 9 you are wondering why USA decided to get involved in the war, beside the fact that obviously the Allied powers were losing the war. Japan is made up of 4 main islands, and on these islands they lack raw materials. So due to the fact that China is so close to Japan, Japan wanted to invade China for her raw materials. America was unhappy about this, as she wanted China's raw materials as well. In the 1930s, Japan decided to invade China. In response, America cut all trade ties with Japan. Japan, however, did not give in after they cut trade ties with them, so America decided to retaliate. Another reason America joined the war was because of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Pearl Harbor was an American naval fleet based in the Pacific, specifically in Hawaii. So what happened was Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. It is noted on this day that it was not very busy. They killed about 30 to 40 Navy officers who were present at the base at this time. The issue was that it was a surprise attack and that Japanese military was able to infiltrate Pearl Harbor without Americans being aware of this. So in response to this attack, America decided to join the war. When America finally decided to join the war, they rounded up 120,000 Japanese Americans from America and moved them to concentration camps. Most of these Americans were children. These concentration camps were in the west of USA. In these concentration camps, the Japanese people were guarded by armed men. They were surrounded by barbed wire fence and lived in very cramped conditions. 25 people would live in one room that was intended only for 4 people. So it was very cramped, very unhygienic, and there was a lot of disease that broke out. It was freezing cold in winter and extremely hot in summer. Obviously, these Japanese Americans lost their jobs. They lost everything that they owned when they were forced to move to these camps. Americans saw them as a threat and regarded them as enemy aliens. German Americans as well as Italian Americans joined the Japanese Americans in these concentration camps while the Allies were fighting in the war. During World War II, it was not just America that put Japanese in concentration camps. Japanese also treated Chinese as well as American people very badly. As we've previously said, Japan invaded China in the 1930s. And by 1942, Japan had taken over most of Southeast Asia and the North and East Islands of Australia. During this time, they committed several autocracies. When they invaded China, they killed many civilians as well as soldiers in China. They were brutally killed. Men, women, children were also raped, and people were tortured and burnt alive. Here is a source from the period of time explaining what happened to the Chinese people. A major means of getting intelligence was to extract information by interrogating prisoners. Torture was an unavoidable necessity. Murdering and burying them follows naturally. You do it so you won't be found out. I believed and acted this way because I was convinced of what I was doing. We carried out our duties and instructed by our masters. We did it for the sake of our country. On the battlefield, we never really considered Chinese humans. We concluded that the Japanese were the superior race. This is a source from a former Japanese officer. So, with regard to the way that the Japanese treated the American people, the Americans, as well as many Allied soldiers, became known as POWs, prisoners of war. They were sent to prisoner of war camps in the Pacific. Later on, these prisoners were shipped to different parts of Japan. I would like to read you a source that focuses on this. During my confinement at the prison camp, we did not receive proper food. I received raw rice, a teacup of soup, a very small amount of salt, sometimes with radish and other vegetables. Otherwise, we had to use weeds in soup. We were housed under very poor conditions. The rooms were full of bed bugs, and during the nights, rats were running over everything in the room. In the summertime, fleas, mosquitoes, and flies were everywhere. Because the toilet was so close to our room, hunger, dirt, and cold combined to make us miserable. This is an account from an American prisoner of war. Grade 9s, that concludes our video lesson for today, which means Term 1's work is covered. Please do not hesitate to contact me via Teams or email if you have any questions. And then lastly, please keep safe, keep smiling, and do your best.